Don't touch that dial. You're tuned in to the Dread Podcast Network.
Welcome to Development Hell. For every horror movie that hits V.O.D, countless others end up D.O.A. Development Hell is the podcast dedicated to unearthing these cursed horror productions. We're going to find out what went wrong, and then decide if these titles still stand a shot at the green light. I am your host, Josh Corngut. I am the managing editor of Dread Central. I am also a filmmaker in Toronto, Canada. This podcast is a proud member of the Dread Podcast Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Development Hell. We now return after a bit of a summer vacation with a very exciting two-part episode as we report back from the Fantasia Film Festival. For these two episodes, I am going to be joined by some of Dread Central's finest. For part one, we are once again joined by Chad Collins. Chad is a Dread Central staff writer. He's also a prof, which I'm going to make him talk about because I have questions. But he's been on this podcast multiple times to talk about Scream, and I think we went over Sundance a year or two ago. So Chad, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, and thank you for such a kind introduction. I am a staff writer at Dread Central, and then I additionally am a professor at college. So,
okay, but like, what do you teach?
So I teach principally communication. Okay. So earlier on, I had a little bit of a bent toward media studies. So we would look at media, ways to develop media literacy, how to assess, analyze principally film. Now I've shifted it a little bit more toward the broader nature of communication, with still that angle of media literacy, how to assess and interpret all the different forms of media that are out there, because youth today are inundated with social media, different kinds of streaming that is not what I grew up with. And, I really talk to them and try to cultivate those best practices of how to be a responsible media consumer. And that makes me sound like such a tool to say it that way.
No. It makes you what you are, honestly, Chad. And like me and Dread Central editor-in-chief Mary Beth McAndrews love to kind of like lovingly make fun of you behind your back and like refer to you as our like academic sort of trope. We have all these different what's the like word trope, but it's for characters.
Archetypes?
Yes. We always joke about the different archetypes we have at Dread Central on the staff. And you're our academic. You're like our, patches on the shoulders and little glasses guy. And I love that. We need it.
I wear glasses too. So.
You do. Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you for joining me to talk about Fantasia. Here's my first question for you. What, in your, view, like, is Fantasia? Like, what makes it unique as a film festival?
So what I really love about Fantasia, as someone who really only got thrown into sort of the festival circuit a few years ago when I started writing with Dread Central, is I love that it really earnestly is kind of worldwide. I enjoy several other festivals, but I think sometimes their slate of titles available really lean toward a specific kind of perspective or sort of a specific origin. But Fantasia, I think, really casts a wide net where you have an opportunity and access to films from, really unique visionaries and voices that you otherwise wouldn't have really, seen or heard. And personally, as a huge fan of just sort of Asian genre cinema, specifically South Korean genre cinema, it is one of the few festivals where it is like a gold mine of just titles I'm really excited to see. So it's always one of my favorite experiences of the year. And I'm grateful to you and Mary Beth for continuing to allow me the chance to be a part of that coverage.
Yeah, you are kind of Dread Central's like South Korea horror correspondent in a way, and we need it. So yeah, and they do pump out some nuts genre fare from that side of the world. I like to think of Fantasia, you know, as because I'm a Canadian, like the gem of the genre festivals. I know like some people like to say that Sitges over in Europe is the number one, or that maybe Fantastic Fest is number one, but I think Fantasia is number one when it comes to genre, and no one can take that away from me. Um, Chad, I'm wondering, historically speaking, not anything from this year, what are some like landmark films you discovered or got to experience from Fantasia?
So I have so many to count. Going back to last year, because this is actually one I was recently thinking about.
Mhm.
There was a Japanese film titled #Manhole,
Yeah.
and the general gist is a man accidentally stumbles into a manhole and needs help getting rescued. So it's a
Mm,
little bit like Danny Boyle, like 127 Hours,
mm,
mixed with eventually it arrives at some very, very heavy, like J horror territory,
mm,
which I don't want to spoil here. But what I think Fantasia really nicely kind of encapsulates is those kinds of gems. I
mhm.
don't think it has a planned Western release yet,
No.
but stumbling across something like that where the general plot just man falls down manhole and you're like, I wonder what this is about. And then it ends up being like one of the most remarkable horror movies I saw that year. I
Cool.
gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars in my review, and I could not stop talking about it.
I need to see it. I really hope we're gonna get some kind of release of that because yeah, you've really hyped us all up. Um, okay, so okay, so the first movie review I actually ever wrote was for Dread Central, and it was a Fantasia movie. It was The Righteous from 2021. Did you get to see that?
I did actually on your recommendation.
Oh, what it okay, so it's like a slow burn Canadian kind of art house black and white religious horror about a man grappling with his issues with God, and a young mysterious figure emerges from the woods and sort of befriends him and his wife. Uh really beautiful, slow, and kind of like mind melt material. Did you like it?
I did actually a great deal.
Okay, yeah, and it's just like a big one for me, just because it's literally the first movie I ever reviewed, and I'm glad it got to be that one. Um, but a Fantasia experience that I will always hold dear was 2022, I think. A bunch of us at Dread Central were covering Fantasia, and we had to get our top picks to Mary Beth, our editor in chief, and she was going to sort of tell us what we were covering. And I was stupid, and I like didn't get my picks in on time at all. I was like the last person to get my picks in, so I kind of like didn't get anything I wanted. So I went through and I was like searching through all like the stuff no one had selected, and I like begrudgingly picked this like weird little Canadian like micro budget movie that turned out to be Skinamarink, and that had its premiere there that year. And I got to be like, I'm pretty sure the first outlet to publish a review on that, soon to be very polarizing, buzzy movie. Like, say what you will about it, like it or not, it like rattled the horror, conversation for a
Mhm.
good year. And I'll never forget, how I got, involved with it. It was like kind of a funny experience. But yeah, I would say those are my two big ones for Fantasia. In your opinion, how does it stack up against the other fests?
So I think Fantasia, like I mentioned previously, I think just the diversity of their slate. And then from a very personal perspective, but I think it's actually part of a larger conversation I'm seeing more regularly.
Mhm.
I was fortunate to start my festival coverage in 2021. The
Mhm.
first festival I actually ever covered was the 2021 Sundance Film Festival.
Wow.
The editor at the time had needed some additional help getting coverage done. So I was looped into that. And this was its first kind of festival, I don't want to say post-COVID, like
Yeah.
COVID is, but
Yep.
post-COVID, so everything was being done strictly remote. And in the years since, we've seen that erode some, where festivals are either outright cutting that remote component, or they've started to limit it considerably,
Mhm.
to disparage the titles, but really to none of the buzziest or most noteworthy titles.
Yep.
And in the digital age, I understand that, right? There are privacy concerns, there are access concerns. Some bad actors, of course, have taken that kind of access and privilege and ruined it for the rest of us by leaking things or making things available prematurely.
Yeah.
So I understand that kind of corporate perspective, but I do think that festival coverage just broadly ends up being so much richer the more people have access to it.
Mhm.
And Fantasia has been, I think, thus far more committed to keeping that in place than some other festivals. So that, like this year, for instance, I don't have any concerns about what I'll be able to check out remotely when covering the festival. Whereas in the past, I've sort of opted out of festival coverage just because the kind of titles I would need to see were not going to be available if I was
Mhm.
not on the ground, because traveling is expensive. I
Yeah.
did Sundance this year in person.
Oh yeah.
That is painfully expensive to do.
Yeah, it is.
I'm still feeling, I think, the ripple of just the impact that had on me financially.
Yeah.
So I always respect and appreciate a festival that makes that kind of access a priority for the critics and for the audiences that want to be able to check it out.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's inclusive in a sense, or actually
Yeah.
very inclusive. So the first movie we are going to talk about is, I think, the only movie on our list today that we have both seen, and I'm excited because I think some tears are going to be shed. There's going to be some blood spilt. We are talking about Witchboard. So Witchboard is a 2024 remake of the 80s classic from director Chuck Russell, who is a horror hero. He directed A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. He did the Blob remake from the 80s. And he also did The Mask with Jim Carrey. So in this movie, you see characters Emily, played by Madison Iseman, who is the lead of I Know What You Did Last Summer, the series, and her fiance Christian, played by Aaron Dominguez. No, that's not it. Whatever. And together they discover this artifact in the woods, this ancient, Wiccan artifact that they call a pendulum board. It's very similar to a Ouija board. And they decide it's cute, and so they take it back to their apartment, and they're going to put it in their new restaurant, which they're opening in the New Orleans' French Quarter. Unfortunately, it's like cursed or something, and Emily becomes obsessed with its power, and I believe it gets her possessed by the Queen of the Witches. We also have Jamie Campbell Boyer in the mix as like a very campy kind of Lestat-esque character, and things get weird and outrageous. Do you think I did an okay job describing it? Did I miss anything big?
I think that covers it.
I love it. So Chuck Russell, I personally, he's like a hero to me. From his works, are any of them big for you in your sort of horror upbringing?
I would say probably The Blob more than anything.
Wow, okay.
I was never really deep into the Nightmare franchise until much later, but The Blob
Mhm.
was one of those kind of cable staples that I pretty
Yeah.
regularly watched.
It's nasty. It's like surprisingly nasty, which is what I love about it.
Mhm.
Okay. What do we know about the original Witchboard? I'll go first. Very little. I've actually never seen the original series. I actually was pretty sure they were like erotica, and I think I'm wrong. So, have you seen any of them?
I hate to disappoint, but I also have not.
That's fine by me. Like, we'll get to see them eventually. I don't think it really matters with this, if I am correct. I think they really do stray from the source material.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what would you say the overall tone to this baby was?
This baby had a tone, a capital T
Uh-oh.
tone.
Yeah.
Is it okay to be
Yeah.
a little negative?
Get real with me.
So I really liked the quasi kind of like faded escape death tone at the beginning, very Final Destination-esque. It really felt, which is something I think you'd highlighted in your actual review for it, like the kind of sort of ensemble horror movie we would have gotten a lot of in the 1990s, where it was pretty people facing death. And as shallow as it sounds, give me a lot of pretty people trying to evade death.
That's my favorite.
Sometimes all I need.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was as the mythology expanded and the movie started needing to sort of satisfy some kind of through line that tonally it lost me a little bit. I was never quite sure whether it was going for, camp or whether it was trying to be straight horror. And some of the later scenes, the climactic scenes, didn't resonate and land with me very well because I wasn't sure what the intention was there. But I do think very strongly in the beginning, it is a really effective riff on those kind of like teen screams we used to get a lot of.
Yes, I think you're being kind to some degree, but that makes sort of sense to me too. Like, this movie definitely is a half an hour way too long, for sure. Like, in my opinion, it could have easily chopped a whole bunch of it out, and it definitely stops making sense in its final act. But for some reason, for some like whim of mine, it's just I didn't care because it just felt like a throwback to just nonsense horror from the late 90s. One movie of particular that it really reminded me of was Wishmaster and its sequels, but also stuff like Hellraiser Bloodline and The Relic, just like these kind of bloated, outrageous 90s horror movies that I'm very nostalgic for, and it really scratched that itch for me, especially when it came to the nonsense with Jamie Campbell Boyer of Stranger Things fame, who is the antagonist, kind of. But he's in a different movie altogether, and every time we see him, like, the music all of a sudden changes, and it's very like it's like very Marquis de Sade vibes, and it's so outrageous. It feels queer coded, but I would not bet that is on purpose. But I just ate that up. Like, I was just like, this is the kind of nonsense that really works for me.
And I think I'm mostly with you there. I think my biggest sticking point, like you noted, is probably the length. Is I want to eat it up, and then I just keep getting served more.
It's almost 2 hours long. It's crazy.
It really is. Like, wild for a movie like this.
It's a lot. It's hard for me. It's hard for me to back this one up, and I'm probably going to be haunted by the only positive review on the internet for this movie in the long run. But I stand by it, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Okay, so Chad, what would you give this movie out of 5?
So I would probably do 2.5 to 3 if I was feeling very generous.
Oh, wow.
Very fair, middle of the road for me.
That's fair. Yeah, this is like a hard 4-star for me, and I'm probably gonna like get more like belligerent about that as I become clearly more wrong as time goes on. But yeah, 4-star for me. Really gave me that Wishmaster 2 realness. So next movie up is one that you're going to be able to lead us through, and that is 4 p.m. Chad, I would love to learn about this one.
Yeah, so 4 p.m. is challenging to talk about because it is really one of those movies where the more you kind of reveal, you take away from some of the impact. But broadly, Jay Song directs. It is adapted from a French novel by Amélie Nothomb, The Stranger Next Door. And a sort of couple, the lead, Jung-in, he is a professor. He is on sabbatical, and he and his wife purchase a new rural country home in South Korea to just kind of spend their sabbatical in peace. And upon arriving, they are introduced to their new neighbor, Yuk Nam, played by Kim Hong Pa. And he's very strange. He's very weird. He's quiet, terse, doesn't really chat with them. And then he leaves. And then in the subsequent days, he continues to arrive at 4 p.m. And you start to see the domestic bliss of this couple kind of unravel because they have this neighborly old man just intruding upon what is supposed to be their kind of respite, from the rest of the world. And it reminded me a lot of Speak No Evil, which we're getting a remake of later this year, in that it really pushes politeness theory to its breaking point. And that's where a lot of, I think, the horror and the tension comes from there. Because it's not conventionally scary. There's nothing, not to spoil anything, but there's nothing innately sinister about this man. He's not a secret assassin or some kind of witchboard monster.
Yeah.
He's just a man who doesn't understand the word no. And this couple is too committed to their very sort of upper middle class, polite, image that they've cultivated through years of academia, that they're not rude people. They're not going to turn him away. He's just a sad old man who needs some company, even when it starts to come at the expense of their own well-being. And very effectively, the ticking of a clock, to tie into the title, plays in really nicely with a lot of attention. When you hear that clock chime that it's 4 p.m., he's going to arrive, and it builds and it escalates into more firm genre territory. But for me, I've always really resonated, probably because of that academic background you and Mary Beth talk about. Having studied communication and politeness theory in particular, and just the way we try to manage our one-on-one dyadic conversations with people in our lives, in the ways that we use those conversations to kind of preserve and protect the face or the image we've created for ourselves. What happens when there's a very conspicuous threat to that image? Because that's when people start to do terrible, horrible things. The sort of mirage starts to, dissipate and fall away. And then you really have to account for who you really are at your core. And that, to me, is always much scarier than something maybe a little bit more explicitly horror-coded.
Yeah, that sounds chilling. Would you say that it's scary? Would you say that it's... Yeah. Did it scare you?
It's always... The scary thing is always challenging because, as you know, right, especially in this sort of social media age, that's always the discourse, is what is or is not scary. Is Longlegs scary? Is aliens scary, right? Or are they thrilling, or are they horrifying, or something else? I think scary is individual. I think everyone responds differently. I think socially, 4 p.m. is very scary, and toward the end, it does start to incorporate a lot more kind of nightmarish imagery that really kind of firmly plants it in the genre. But the build-up, to me, I think, is more frightening because of how realistic it is. Because it really just amounts to, this man is annoying you, and you don't know how to tell him no, which I think is something everyone has been in before, where just for the sake of being polite, you're not setting any boundaries for yourself. And it's very scary to see how these boundaries you thought you had start to erode. And suddenly your life isn't your own anymore. You're instead beholden to the whims of somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to stop just by saying, hey, no.
You hear that from like women, especially, a lot. That,
absolutely.
We're conditioned, or they're conditioned to be polite, and then that can lead to like pretty dangerous situations. So this is one I'm pretty excited to check out if we get it on this side of the pond. What would your rating out of 5 be?
So for me, I gave it a solid 4 stars. I really thought, as like a slice of social horror, which we're seeing more of, I like that it kind of took an unconventional route. And I noted it in my review. I think it pairs so nicely with Speak No Evil as two kind of opposite ends of what happens when that sense of politeness overrides your own kind of instinct for survival. And that, I think, really resonated with me. There's so much, I think, thematically that you can unpack from it. And visually as well, it's a gorgeous movie. The way Jason kind of plays around with the camera, I think, to simultaneously make you feel claustrophobic, but also tease you with a very clear escape from that, of course, no one is really taking advantage of.
That can be chills. It's also like, from your description, I kind of am picking up a little bit on funny games, but
Oh, yeah,
I'm going to
absolutely.
wait to see for myself. So for the next film, I'm going to lead us in a conversation about a movie that had its world premiere called The Soul Eater. So this is a French film. It's a horror mystery with some heavy crime elements to it. Here, the logline is: when violent and gruesome deaths start plaguing a small mountain village, an old legend about a malevolent creature resurfaces. This is the latest from French duo. How do you say their names, my friend? Chad, you got this.
I've always said Alexandre Bustillo and Julien Mari.
Alexander Bustillo and Julien Mari. These are the horror legends who have made previous movies like Inside, Livid, The Deep House, Among the Living, and the 2017 Texas Chainsaw film Leatherface. I know that we both are big fans of these guys. And yeah, where did that start with you?
So for me, it obviously naturally, I think, started with Inside.
Mhm.
You, I think, maybe can relate to this. If you remember the Dimension Extreme label,
Of course.
and I had rented it on a whim, and I was horrified and also in love. Not to, hype myself, but there is, rumor has it, a gorgeous essay on how well Inside sort of flips the slasher script on the collector's edition of the Second Sight Films release of Inside, written by yours truly.
Yeah.
Huge fan of Inside. I've enjoyed everything they put out since. I had the privilege, actually, of interviewing them both back in 2020 about Candicia, one of their Shudder exclusives.
Right.
Which I haven't, of course, had the chance to see The Soul Eater yet, but it sounds very similar to the kind of work they were doing supernaturally in Candicia.
Okay. Interesting. It's a huge deal that you've got an essay on that release. It's cool as hell, and I think just kind of goes to show, yeah, that you know what you're talking about when it comes to these two, specifically that movie, which is it's no small film. That's a major horror classic that you sort of got to contribute to. So that's fucking cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for me, the first horror movie that I ever got to see at TIFF that really, really blew my mind was their second film, I think, Livid. I think it was around 2011. And to this day, it may still be one of my favorite theater-going experiences. It's not necessarily their best reviewed film, but it is one of my favorite movies of all time. Pretty simple setup. A group of kids on Halloween night, break into this old lady's mansion to find treasure. And it turns out that she is this ancient vampire who was also once a ballet teacher. And there's crazy fantasy elements, and it's beautiful, kind of nonsense, very French, and I'm a little bit obsessed with it. And I think part of the reason is that I've never been able to see it again. I have never been able to find an official release of it here in Canada. I know it was on Shudder in the States, never here, and I don't think it ever really got a proper streaming release here. So I don't know how it holds up, but goddamn, I love it so much.
Holds
Yeah.
up very well. I
Oh, good.
revisited it in anticipation of Abigail, just because the two seemed so similar.
Right.
And weird, I think I appreciate it more now. I
Yeah,
think
well,
part of the reason that
good.
critical reception at the time was so
Weird.
sort of split was coming from something like Inside.
So different.
It's hard to knock out, such a banger right off the
Yeah.
bat, right? When you debut with something like that, it's always going to be the metric.
Mm-hmm.
But I think with a little bit of distance from it, I think it lands even better now.
Interesting. So with all that said, it pains me to say that the Soul Eater was fairly disappointing for me. I've heard different opinions from other people that got to attend it at the festival, but I was I was not feeling this one. I feel like it was going in a lot of weird directions at once. So yeah, it's about, technically about this folklore of this, entity called the Soul Eater, and people in this small town are starting to like kind of lose their minds and murder each other, but when they're murdering each other, they're also like very horny and like have orgasms as they're dying, and it's like very weird and no one really understands what's going on. It kind of has a Long Legs vibe of like who's killing these people or like making them kill each other. Actually, kind of strikingly similar to Long Legs on that wavelength. But then when you learn about what actually is going on, I won't spoil it. It's like ridiculous and really could have used another couple of drafts, in my opinion. And it's very cliche with the two lead sort of characters. We have this sort of no bullshit cop. She's, a kind of city-esque, and then, she's joined by this rough and tumble sort of, small town cop. And, it's always like, stay off my case. No, you stay off my case. Oh, we're gonna fuck. It's like, we've seen it a million times before, and the things we haven't seen before don't make sense. And there was some pretty scary stuff involving like deep web child, torture pornography. But that kind of horror, in my opinion, really needs to be earned and handled carefully. I'm not that it offended me in any way. It just was like kind of egregious to just kind of tack it on in the way that it felt like it was. So I was, I think I was just so excited about it based on my, how much I love these filmmakers. And this one just really didn't work for me. That said, I do hear people are really excited about, the style and the beauty of this film, which are both present. So I'm going to have to give this one a 2.5 out of 5. And I think that's sort of being nice. So that's okay, C'est la, c'est la P. All right. Our next film is The Dead Thing. I'm curious to hear about it.
Yeah, we get to end on a more positive note.
Yeah.
So in The Dead Thing, this is from Elric Kane, his solo debut. Synopsis: a young woman lost in a series of meaningless connections falls for a charismatic and sensitive man who hides a dark secret that turns her affair into a dangerous obsession. And so Alex, played by Blue Hunt, is really just, I think, in a very universal kind of cycle of online dating where these connections are kind of meaningless, they're ephemeral. They're satisfactory, for a short kind of thrill, but they don't really have the longevity you need for something more serious. And that's something, as you get older, right, you start to look for. So for me, right off the bat, I was immediately engaged as, again, a communication person. I actually did a great deal of my study on relational communication, specifically interpersonal comm and romantic relationships, and it's a wildly different landscape now than it ever has been before. We don't have third places. We don't really have
It's
realms
true.
you can go to meet anybody, if not for swiping through them online. It
Yeah.
truly starts to feel like a dating lottery.
Yeah.
Or for anybody who will understand this, right? We're using grids to try and
Yeah.
find people, to connect with. And so when Alex meets Kyle, right? Kyle is the dream man, right? He's kind. Wonderfully, what I really appreciate in the Dead thing is it gets to be pretty sexy, Josh.
Wow. I'm ready
And
for that.
not weird dead orgasm sexy, like
Okay.
possibly
Okay.
happened in the
All
Soul
right.
Eater, but
Okay.
just like an earnest commitment to being sexy, which this whole anti-sex in movies discourse, it's
I
kind of
hate it.
refreshing to see a movie so tenderly and intimately be like, yeah, people have sex and that happens and that's okay. And it's part of what we're doing here. Alex does eventually come to find something out about Alex that, like everything else, I'm not going to spoil here. It arrives pretty early, the reveal, but still, the less you know, the better. And then it becomes kind of a very dark, very twisted obsession with Kyle and how deeply she kind of throws herself into that at the expense of some other kinds of relationships that crop up throughout the film, whether that's with a coworker, some other folk around town, right? How much she's really willing to give up about herself for somebody else. And I think I appreciated it. It's paced really, really nicely. It arrives, of course, at those kind of bloody thrills that you're really anticipating from the beginning. And I think it's just like a sexy and bloody time. It's definitely very low key.
Okay.
It's not anything that's going to sort of shatter the genre space, but it's one of those really kind of hidden gems that going into it, I hadn't really known much about it. I don't want to say I wasn't anticipating it, right? But the nature of a festival, you just kind of end up seeing some things where you're like, I wonder how this is going to turn out. And it's always really refreshing when it does. I seem to be in the consensus, luckily. I likened it very much to Cat Person, which I saw at Sundance 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
which is
How
my.
about you?
I loved Cat Person. I
I liked it
remain
too.
a bona fide Cat Person stan.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things I like to do after I've watched a movie and I've got my review published is I then like to go and see, I wonder what my peers were thinking about this.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
Cat Person was staggering to me because all of the worst movie of the year. And I was like,
Wow, people are idiots.
what? I was raving, and I did not know that it was so bad to a lot of people.
So funny.
The Dead thing, I think, is landing better with most people. Very hypnotic, very sexy, very bloody. Never really scary in the conventional sense, but I think, again, just much like 4 p.m. is kind of a social lens into the natural extension of here's where we're at right now, kind of socially and culturally. In this case, it's with the dating scene. And here's where that can really then be taken to very distressing, extreme, and then violent ends. I think it worked really, really well for me.
I love that. I'm psyched to see this one when I can. Chad, where can you be found on the internet if you do wish to be found?
I can be found on Twitter at ChadIsCollins.
Mm-hmm.
We love Twitter. And I am now trying at least to plug my Letterboxd because, again,
Oh.
my better judgment, I have to use it now.
Mm-hmm.
I really tried to resist. I was an IMDb girly,
I know.
and I was like, when did we all move to Letterboxd?
It
But
happened.
I'm at the same username there, Chad is Collins.
Mhm.
You can watch me watch a lot of bad things and then give them
Yeah.
really good reviews because that's what I live for.
Yeah, we're similar like that. So I appreciate you, Chad. Well, thank you so much for joining me once again on an episode of Development Hell. I am sure you'll be back sooner than later. And yeah, we'll see you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Now don't go away. I am gonna hit stop, but you're not allowed to leave. Thank you so much for listening to Development Hell. If you enjoy this podcast, then please do us a major favor of leaving us 5 stars and writing a positive review. It really makes all the difference in the world. We'll see you next week with a brand new episode of Development Hell.
Thank you for listening to the Dread Podcast Network.